Vakal crouched in the ruins. His breathing was slow and steady, bolter loaded with precious ammunition aimed down onto the street. Many had fled through here, running from the oncoming advance. Vakal had just watched. He offered no assistance, no words of encouragement. The Salamanders had, helping move cargo and sheltering orphans away from the battle, simultaneously giving Vakal and his brothers a look of barely disguised disgust. It was wrong to call it a battle. Truly, it was a massacre. They could all hear it. Astartes hiding amongst rubble on both sides of the street. The majority of the concealed were Vakal's true brothers, now legionless. Each one had painted their armor black, the only mark of their former allegiance in their helms and hints of midnight blue or streaks of lightning. Some still held trophies over their armor, but all wore a faded imperial aquila on a pauldron to show whose side they were on. The Salamander's armor was similarly blackened, save they still showed the colors of their legion on one shoulder. They could afford to. No loyalist would hunt them for being a salamander. That luxury was not afforded to the former sons of Curs. Internally, they called themselves the Nice Children to distinguish themselves and prevent confusion over Vox. It had initially been Akaraz's suggestion, quickly adopted by the rest. In all, there were 16 loyal children in the maze of ruins. Each one waited silently, exercising every piece of their training and upbringing to hide in the deep shadows. They didn't have to wait long, as the salamanders retreated past them, covering the civilians as the sounds of the real battle died. The twin-colored watched as local militia fled, sprinting down the street in a desperate retreat. They heard the laughing that followed them, the grinding of tracks as something approached. The Knight's children retreated further into the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. Vakal counted the oncoming traitors. 1, 2, 3, 4. He kept counting until he reached 29. Then he frowned. They'd have to kill at least 14 in the opening volley alone, a tall task even for them. He watched the traitors advance with bloody armor as a rhino rolled into view. 31. The gunner and driver would have to die as well. The Knight's children waited until the symbol of the Sons of Horus came into clear view, and with a single muted shot they sprung the trap. Vakal opened fire in near-perfect sync with his brothers, firing a burst into the rhino's gunner who slammed back against the roof of his vehicle and laid still. He counted again as he switched targets. 17. He pulled the trigger of his bolter again. 16. 3 of his brothers triggered jump packs, soaring above the battle and then plummeting down onto the rhino. Vakal ducked as bolter fire stitched up at him. He kept his back to the wall for a mere second, before popping back up and firing again into the Sons of Horus. His target lost his head in a shower of bolts as another fell to a single, perfect shot from one of their recon marines. The Knight's children rushed in from their cover, firing point-blank to secure kills as Vakal vaulted the ledge he hid behind and hit the ground running. 8. Chain swords roared as the Sons of Horus found themselves outnumbered, each one fighting one of the Knight's children and others fighting 2 at once. One traitor tried to run, to make it back to his lines, only for Zul to descend on him with the chainsword, screaming its way through the traitor's midsection. 6. Vakal let his own roar as well, sweeping out the legs of another enemy occupied with fighting Sahis. As the Son of Horus fell with his legs a bloody ruin, Sahis leapt onto him like a hound, and Vakal moved on to other targets. 3. McKenz had ripped off the hatch to the driver's compartment with lightning claws and was firing his bolt pistol point-blank into the driver's skull. 0. The street fell silent. The Knight's children quickly set about stripping the dead of ammunition and weapons, confirming kills with combat knives and making sure the Sons of Horus never got back up. Vakal glanced at his helm's clock. 15 seconds from the first shot. He watched a disgruntled Jacques emerge from his position, pistol drawn and launcher half slung over his shoulder. "There will be a time to use the launcher, brother." "I would be able to use it more if there was ammunition." "That goes for all of us. There may be missiles in that rhino." Jacques just nodded before heading over. McKenn's already pulling open the doors so they could access the compartment. While Jacques searched for spare missiles, McKenn scoured for more Bane Strike rounds and grenades. He would be lucky to find them. Vakal turned back to the dead legionnaires, looking for a set of markings. "Vakal." Akaraz called for his brother, flipping over a corpse with his boot. "I found this, Sergeant. Looks like Gazai's kill." A single bolt shell had punched through the Astartes' throat, nearly beheading them, save for the neck muscles that barely kept it together. "What shall we do with him?" "Mutilate the body and put it up for display. When the other traitors come, let them see the price of treachery." Akaraz responded wordlessly, crouching down and pulling off the traitor's helmet to begin skinning what he could. They all knew these acts were works of art. Not like the ones created by the Emperor's children, salamanders or blood angels, but instead brutal, and taking an altogether different set of skills. Of the Knight's children, one of them stood a cut above the rest. Unstable as he was in the eyes of Vakal, Zul was a flare of unparalleled skill within the small band of loyalists. He was given a berth by his brothers, and a much wider one by the Salamanders. As the others occupied themselves with looting, taking as much ammunition as they could from the dead and wrecking what they could not recover, Zul crouched over corpses. Strips of flesh came off each corpse he was near, and the former Terror Marine, working with machine-like efficiency and pace. He made the field of an ambush into the scene of a massacre so common on dead Nostramo. As the sounds of battle continued in the distance where local militia still resisted the Sons of Horus and their mortal allies, the Knight's children prepared to launch their next ambush. As the Salamanders focused on protecting those civilians they could, Vakal led his brothers on the offensive. Leaving the scene of the first ambush, they moved from shadow to shadow. 16 Astartes hunted as a pack, slinking through abandoned buildings and silencing any traitors they came across. Where they found squads and platoons of mortals, they descended upon them with blades and limbs. The kills were always near silent, chain weapons lacking their distinct roar as bearers used their weight and reach alone. Rarely, they would linger long enough to mutilate the corpses further, instead moving on and leaving the broken bodies for someone else to find. They worked quickly, annihilating isolated elements and working to find more significant kills. Vejak and Gazai operated as a pair, working up to vantage points to guide their brothers around forces they would struggle to beat and keeping them updated on the battle. The two recon marines moved rapidly from one location to another, so they would be much harder to detect. Croy, Merkens, and Volkars operated similarly, staying near rooftops and skirting the edges of open areas where their jump packs could best be utilized. The remaining Knight's children were split into 2 squads of 6. One group led directly by Vakal and the other by Akaraz. The former contained Zul and Sulaz, the latter with Jacques. Another Sons of Horus squad 150 ahead with mortal support assets. Looks like a platoon. No armor we can see. Relocating now. Vejak's whisper of a voice came over the Vox as the recon marines moved to the next covering point. Akaraz, head north. We'll hit them from 2 angles. Understood. We'll wait for your signal. The Astartes quickly split off with his demi-squad, navigating through the city to a better position, while Vakal led his group onward. They vaulted over broken walls, carefully and rapidly moving through deep shadows while getting eyes on their new target. Fakal came to a halt as they neared the boulevard. His brothers fanned out to get better firing positions as they sighted the advancing element. They waited for the enemy to come closer. Fakal could sense his brother's lust to kill, to mutilate. He felt them picking targets, silently signaling each other who they would go after. The vampire, as he was known to his brothers, risked a quick glance at the assault unit. He quickly counted 12 Astartes and 37 mortals. No armor, but one of the Astartes stood out to him. Fakal ducked back out of sight before the traitors noticed him, and sent a single message to his brothers. "The officer is mine." Alikos marched forward with eyes straight ahead. The conquest of this world was going well, with small pockets of heavy resistance. A few squads had reported encountering scattered salamanders, presumably those who had not answered the summons to Istvan. The son of Horus's mind lingered on the thought of finishing off those loyalist scum. One of his brothers marched in lockstep next to him, a heavy Vox unit on his back. "Second platoon still not responding, Commander." "Keep trying. Their Vox is probably damaged." Alikos snarled to the operator, who quickly continued trying to hail the lost platoon. 2 companies of Astartes were in the city, and losing a full platoon would be problematic to his assault. The mortal troops with them were helpful in supplementing the sheer might of the Astartes. Otherwise, they were somewhat annoying. Those around him had been hand-picked for their role as an escort to the command squad, mortals especially. As they pushed forward, Alikos tracked a few vehicles that were trying to push through the rubble and reach the infantry's advance. A land raider, the one that should have been with them, had faltered with a lucky shot and was now hurrying to catch up. The mortal defenders were proving to have more in them than anyone had predicted. They had fought hard, taking many mortal assets with them, but only a few Astartes had even been so much as wounded. Alikos smiled under his helm as his eyes focused on the greater prize ahead, the governor's palace. Somewhat fortified and surely where the loyalists were falling back to. He would meet the salamanders there and annihilate them. So focused was he that he almost didn't notice his Vox operator's helm erupting in blood. Vejok fired a second and third round into the Nuncio Vox operator's helmet to ensure the kill. Gazai fired a millisecond later, cursing as his shot barely hit his target. The Vexilla bearer collapsed to one knee, head snapped to one side due to the force of the bolt that had grazed his neck. Vejok switched to another target, sight set on another Astartes with a Nemesis bolter. He pulled the trigger, shattering the scope of the sniper before moving to suppress. Gazai fired again beside him, finishing off the Vexilla bearer before he too switched targets. The 2 recon marines continued firing at any targets of opportunity as their brothers opened fire at the traitors from their own positions. Another bolt hit its target, staggering a veteran who was quickly finished off by another. He switched targets again, suppressing another veteran as they ducked behind cover. Vejok kept him there, shots clattering off whatever armor was exposed as the knight's children left cover and descended onto the faltering mortals. They died quickly, slaughtered in only a few seconds before the knight's children began attacking the surviving sons of Horus. Vejok suddenly lost his usefulness, unable to get a clean shot. Regardless, he tried to find an opening. His view skimmed over the battle, and he saw a flash of reflected light in the distance. He focused on it and swore. "Land Raider!" Fakal Chain's sword roared through the air as he fought this son of Horus. He had barely heard Vejok's call as his own blade was deflected away. The communication of a Vox was suddenly frantic, the knight's children debating whether they should disengage. In his peripheries, he saw his brothers begin to fall back, disappearing into the ruins. Fakal heard the tracks of the Land Raider and its engine as his blade parried his opponents. He heard Jack calling for more information so he could get a clear shot. Vakal broke Alakar's guard and ran, bolter fire following his fleeing form into the ruins. The Vox was alight with communication as they tried to find a way to get close enough to the Land Raider and its reinforcements as another voice interrupted in Vakal's ear. Unven ducked behind a pillar, firing almost blindly at the oncoming hordes as he did so. He knew a few of his shots would connect with targets based on the sheer mass of attackers. As the Salamander reloaded his bolter, he glanced over to the planet's militia. They took whatever cover they could find, firing an assortment of light firearms at the attackers. Autoguns of local make, stub guns, las carbines, and las guns were scattered amongst the mortals as available. A few even wielded shotguns. Such were the defenders' own weapons. Others looted from their enemies as they fell back. As the Salamander checked his brother's positions, he heard the roar of engines. Hegazon nearby peeked from his cover, signaling that there was an oncoming rhino. A moment later, a heavy bolter roared and shells raked their way through light cover. Hegazon's Volkite culverin returned fire with a brief stream of orange light. Unven peeked back around the corner with his bolter raised. Quickly, he spotted a squad of Sons of Horus disembarking the now burning rhino and opened fire. Another of his brothers down the line opened fire as well, catching the squad in a crossfire that pinned them behind the vehicle. More calls from the Salamanders stationed around the palace brought the increasing number of traitor armor and Astartes to light. Based purely off what he heard, around a company of legionnaires were coming down on his head, though the number may be more or less. The mortal defenders began to fall back as the Sons of Horus came into view, consolidating and moving to the final established fortifications. Unven and his salamanders followed, taking fire as shots slammed into the ferrocrete all around them. As the sergeant vaulted a fallen pillar into cover, an autocannon to his left opened up. He watched a Son of Horus get caught by the sudden appearance of the weapon before return fire silenced the new threat. One of the mortal operators shambled out of the position, collapsing only a few feet away and leaving a trail of his innards behind him. One by one, the remaining static weapons were destroyed as the salamanders moved rapidly within lines to reinforce buckling sections. Unven was too busy just trying to distribute firepower to attempt to hail the Knight's children again. Vakal had led them into the city for hit-and-run assaults, giving almost no elaboration. Since then, communication had been erratic at best, and any messages were unsure to make it through. The moment the first defensive line had broken, Unven had tried to reach Vakal and request their presence. Receiving no reply, he had tried repeatedly and gotten nothing in return with each repetition.
Where are those damned flayers? Predator at 107.
Rule is down.
On my way. Someone take my place.
Covering Halvor.
Sergeant, we've lost the mortars. They're charging.
Brace. The defenders opened fire with everything they had left as the salamanders drew whatever blades they had to counter the charge. As the Sons of Horus closed, the first ones were doused in promethium. Noth, with his projector, and Ukrator, with his standard flamer, poured the orange fire into the Sons of Horus, as the others fired pistols if they had them. As his brothers fought off the Astartes, Unven's position was assaulted by a group of heavily armored mortal troops. The sergeant waited for them to get close before triggering the flamer attached to his bolter. As the flames touched the mortals, they screamed, prompting the others to fall back. Unven leapt on the chance, charging in with a combat knife in one hand as he locked his bolter to his thigh. He tore into the first traitors within his range, obliterating skulls and carving them in two as he drew his pistol and used it like a club. Sensing more incoming, Unven fell back to defensive line where his allies were resisting other assaults. He moved to plug the line where a pair of the Sons of Horus were assaulting the mortals around them. Blood caked their armor as they slaughtered the militia who were desperately trying to find some weakness. Roaring his fury, Unven charged the traitors and fired his bolt pistol into the chest of one. They staggered back as a sergeant's combat knife thrust forward, embedding itself into their throat before withdrawing in a fountain of blood. Chainsaw roared as the salamander stepped back to dodge. The two quickly fell into the pattern of a duel, Unven parrying and dodging as he tried to get into the Sons of Horus guard. Repeatedly, he would step in, only to be swiftly countered and forced back. Strikes began to land, great scours carving through the sergeant's armor as a vox filled with the sounds of a lion just holding to life. With almost no warning, chaos erupted in the rear lines of the assaulting Sons of Horus. The Astartes Unven was dueling lapsed in concentration for a moment, and the salamander took the chance. He tackled the traitor and plunged his combat knife into exposed joints over and over and over until the traitor stopped moving. His hands covered in blood, Unven stood back up. He looked out to the lines far from the loyalist holdout where vehicles burned and mortal traitors fired nearly blind into the city ruins. As he focused, the salamander spotted glimpses of bolter fire in the black armor that marked the Knight's children.
Took them long enough.
Hexan drawled as he aimed his culverin at a yet undamaged Rindo. Unven nodded slightly before raising his chainsword so his brothers and the garrison could see.
Into the fires of battle. Unto the anvil of war.
His brothers chorused back as Unven revved the blade and charged out of the palace. 7 salamanders thundered across the ruins, weapons blazing away. Looted weapons roared as the sons of Vulcan ran down the retreating traitors. They carved a path through mortal and Astartes alike. In bursts of flame, Noth incinerated any who dared approach him. Ahead, they could hear the vox screams of the Knight's children. As soon as one appeared, they would withdraw and another strike would hit elsewhere on the line. In a matter of moments, the battle devolved to chaotic melees. Unven found himself in between a trio of Sons of Horus, separated from his brothers who tore into any traitor within their reach. As the battle raged around him, Unven fought purely on the defensive. He used what little fuel lived in his combi flamer to try and keep the traitors at bay while he dealt with them one-on-one. Soon, though, the flamer ran empty, and Unven had barely left a dent against the traitors. Dropping his bolter, the salamander roared and took up his chainsword with both hands. The blade roared with him as he launched himself forward, but they were ready. As his target blocked the assault, the other two struck their own blows. Blades bit through damaged plate and into his flesh, ripping away great chunks of muscle before Unven shook off the assault. Practically, on the moment he withdrew, a chain axe tore into the shoulder of one of the Sons of Horus. As the blade drew up and the arm fell, a swift kick sent the traitor to a knee, and half a moment later he was headless. The half-second of hesitation from the 3 remaining Astartes was all the newcomer needed, as point-blank shots killed the second traitor. Unven recovered before the Son of Horus, driving his chainsword up through the chin and destroying the brain stem before withdrawing in a splatter of gore. The chain axe wielder kicked a mortal, sending the body flying into the side of a burning rhino where it simply ceased to be. As Unven looked at the Astartes, he recognized the decorations and armor. Zul seemingly smiled before charging into the next mortal. While around the salamander, the Knight's children simply murdered. Bodies were thrown around haphazardly, Sons of Horus retreating quickly as bolt shells detonated around them. Every few seconds, a muffled shot would sound, and someone died. The salamanders regrouped, but the fight was already won. As Unven looked through the carnage, one Night Lord approached through the death.
Unven? Vakal? I got your message. We were tied down by a land raider. So there's more. with heavy armor. We need to leave.
The knight's children behind the two were already looting, taking whatever they could carry and tossing ammunition to each other.
There are still citizens who require our help. There is nothing more we can do for them. This planet is doomed. No population is ever doomed, Vakal. I've already contacted Black Sun. This battle is over.
Vakal turned, kicking over a dead auxilia before starting to walk.
If you wish to die, Salamander, that is your choice. There are other fields where we can hurt them.
Unvan grimaced, watching Vakal disappear into the carnage. In the new silence, the sergeant could hear engines and the marching of feet. Akaraz grabbed a spare combat knife from one of the dead, using it to take a trophy of bone from the traitor he had killed with his bolter. As the turn stood, he watched the salamanders regroup back at the center. Will they leave with us? He wondered aloud, his previous knowledge somewhat invalidated by recent events. Something was different about the salamanders after Istvan. We'll lose nothing if they don't. Merkens hissed as he tore out the head of a mortal with the spine still attached. Akaraz scoffed in response. Firepower is firepower. Better to have it than not. They're weak. They're guardians, unlike us. I have no need for your lectures, Terran. It's fact, Raptor. Let's go. I can already hear that damn Land Raider. Akaraz stood up, grabbing a magazine from a dead traitor before running off. Merkens followed, and the knight's children ran from the scene. They stopped out of sight of the governor's palace in a park. The thunderhawk was camouflaged there, mercifully left unscathed by the battle. Vakal was already there, ushering his brothers into the transport and accounting for everybody. Akaraz opted to stand with their elected leader, watching his brothers distribute the new weapons and ammunition they had picked up. What did Verhawk say?
He thinks they won't come.
Merkens said that as well.
What do you think?
No idea. They've changed.
We'll give them 2 minutes. If we don't see them by then, we will leave.
Akaraz nodded in response as Zul walked up the ramp, looking at a new trophy he had taken. The Terran groaned under his breath, reminded of the depravity the Legion he now hated had fallen to. Vakal seemed to notice, but he too said nothing. So, the two stood in silence as the Thunderhawk was primed for takeoff. A minute passed, without a word before the first salamander appeared. Akaraz beckoned them over, and almost immediately more arrived. He counted them one by one as they appeared before noticing the mortals hidden amongst them. Before he could say anything, Vakal did.
What are the mortals doing here? Their militia was saving them.
Akaraz glanced over at his brother and then into the hold. Every single one of his brothers was listening, Croy having come down from the pilot throne to watch.
Saving them. We don't have the room. They will be another fighting arm for us. Since when is more firepower a bad thing? Since we have no supply line. Do these mortals have their own food? Ammunition? They have both. They will weigh us down. They will be helpful. You have my word.
Vakal's eyes narrowed. The knight's children ready to act on the next words to escape the impromptu leader's lips.
Fine. Get on board before the traitors find us.
The salamanders quickly parted to hurry the mortals aboard as Akaraz looked back into the hold. Jacques, Bragas, Yash, Bridge. The Theostates stood up and walked to Croy, who quietly turned around. As the quartet ascended to take their places, the mortals cautiously stepped into the Thunderhawk filled with transhuman warriors. Without a word, the knight's children moved to the far end of the bay and took their spots. A few salamanders formed a kind of buffer between them and the mortals. Once the last ones were aboard, Akaraz and Vakal entered the Thunderhawk and closed the ramp behind them. The engines roared, and the two looked at the hold. Halvo had his hands full, tending to his many salamander brothers who had been wounded. Sahis had placed his bolter in one of the ship's racks and was doing likewise. Though untrained, he had picked up what he could and was attempting to stabilize and encourage healing. It was all he could really do, but that skill alone had made him the Knight's Children's designated apothecary. As the Thunderhawk took off, Akaraz opened a channel to Vakal directly. A moment, and the request went through, and they began a drawn-out conversation on the future. As they did so, Unven stood and walked over to stand in front of Zool.
Zool.
The Astartes looked up from his trophy as the salamander spoke in High Gothic.
My gratitude for saving my life back there.
Zool paused for a moment, then laughed. Those 3 Chthonians! You distracted them well enough, salamander.
Regardless, the fact is I would have died without your intervention.
You would have lived. Maybe just without an arm.
I'm being serious.
Losing an arm when we have so few is a shame. Should be prevented, you know. The salamander gave what could be a scoff of amusement and returned to his spot. Akaraz and Vakal once again continued, the subject changing.
That's new. Probably a formality. The Nocturnians are too kind for their own good.
They've never been like that to one of us.
Circumstances change. As always. There is still a lot of traitors to kill. Afterwards we can argue philosophy and ethics. If we live long enough to. Perhaps we will.
As the conversation moved again to the subject of logistics and organization, the Thunderhawk left the atmosphere of Chalmers and hurried to reunite with Black Sun. As they slipped through the void and what traitor ships lingered, the sons of Horus crushed what resistance was left. For nearly a week, they would search for the twin-colored, finding only scraps of broken armor, expended shells, and the dead left to rot after the Knight's Children had treated them. Alakos raged as the ones who had so heavily damaged his forces escaped his grasp, free to roam the stars. Aboard Black Sun, the guilty just laughed.
Greetings all, it is a Knight of Nostramo. I am recording this very late at night, so I apologize. A few things I wish to address at the end of this video. Primarily that we have surpassed not only 350, but 360 subscribers. I'm very thankful to all of you for subscribing and sticking around. Okay. Next thing I wish to address the delay in videos. I know I'm not a major channel or anything, but it's kind of annoying for me because I had the script done. It just took me a long time to record. So I apologize for the delay. On a similar note, part of the reason that the first month was very heavy with content was because I had those scripts written for a while beforehand. They were all pre-written. And I believe only Akaraz's tale was actually written during that month. All of the other ones were written long before. Sorry. Hence, slight differences. Relating to this video specifically, just wish to talk about some of the difficulties to try to explain why things may have sounded slightly weird. I'm using new software, which I'm actually rather enjoying, so I think I'll continue using it. But that took a little bit of time to learn and adjust to. Also, you may have noticed the audio quality is slightly different. That's because the audio was recorded instead of my usual sit down, record everything in one session. It was recorded in 4 or 5 sessions, maybe, in varying locations, varying circumstances, all that stuff. So the acoustics were not, how do you say, the same. I recorded, one of my sessions was in a booth. 2 of my sessions were in the usual place, another session was somewhere else, and yeah, it's a whole thing. I believe I mentioned that I difficulty with the Salamanders' voices. So I've recorded this probably a few times now. But I had some difficulties with the Salamanders in particular, but they're so critical to the story, it didn't feel right not giving them voices. So, I apologize if they're not quite what you imagine the Salamanders would sound like. But I do have my vocal limitations, and unfortunately the Salamanders fall outside of my standard range. I tried to make it better in post, but I don't think it quite worked. Regardless, it is the best I can do at the moment, so unfortunate, but that is the case. Next thing I'd like to address, honestly, probably once a month is probably going to be significantly more regular for me than the first month or so of content, purely because I write all of my scripts myself, and it takes significant time for me to come up with an idea, plan it out, write a story, and be happy enough with it to record or publish it in some way. So, this delay may be more normal, unfortunately. But otherwise, relating to the video, it was by far the longest I've done. And there's quite a... I don't know exactly how much content I cut, but there was a fair bit that mostly re-recording lines and extraneous pauses, stuff like that, though I may have missed stuff, so I apologize for that. Anyway, that is quite enough of me rambling. So, I have been the Knight of Nostramo. This is not my normal exit, but whatever. I do hope you sincerely enjoyed. And there will be a playlist for the twin colored created either when this video is out or shortly after, which will be on the main channel page, if you wish to listen to their tales consecutively. Anyways, that is all. I do hope you enjoyed, and farewell.